experiencing beatings from caregivers, lack of parental love, forced child labour, and the constant risk of death from illness, or worse, being murdered by one's own mother. These were just a few of the challenges faced by children growing up during the Middle Ages. In fact, during medieval times, being a child was extremely tough. People didn't view childhood the same way as we do today. Historians even say that the concept of childhood was practically non-existent. So let's journey back in time to explore whether childhood truly existed back then. What was life like for children in the Middle Ages? Did they receive love and care from their parent? And at what age did they begin working for a living? Hello guys, and welcome. If you would like to hear more historical gossip, then just click on that subscribe button. Now, let's start today's video. Viewer discretion is advised. This is an educational documentary. Historians suggest that during the Middle Ages, parents didn't show as much love and care towards their kids as they do today. This was partly because many children didn't survive infancy due to diseases like the plague. People back then thought of kids as almost like non-entities caught between life and death. The fear of losing them was everywhere, so parents didn't want to get too attached emotionally. This fear was made worse by the fact that child murder was quite common during that time. At first, the church would punish child murderers with long periods of penance, but later they became more lenient, especially towards mothers who took the lives of their children because they were poor and couldn't afford to raise them. It wasn't until the late Middle Ages when people started seeing this like a real crime. Women who did put an end to the lives of their babies were often thought to be mentally ill. Other signs that kids weren't highly valued back then include how many of them were made to work and how often they were abandoned. Plus, many children faced really strict discipline. During the Middle Ages, people were okay with parents, teachers, and bosses using physical punishment on kids. They thought it was fine as long as it wasn't too much. For example, books reports in the 1400s of a girl named Elizabeth that got beaten by her mum because she didn't want to marry an old guy. In court, folks would argue about how harsh the punishment was, but they rarely questioned if the beating itself was okay. In fact, only if someone was too rough, they could get in trouble themselves. A famous court discussion includes a boy, Gilbert, that had a really bad tutor who beat him up a lot for not understanding lessons. Even though it wasn't his fault, Gilbert suffered severe injuries as a result. It was a tough time for kids back then, but that's just how things were. Medieval childhood was a whole different ballgame compared to today. There isn't much proof that kids in medieval times had bedtime stories, but they definitely had a culture of storytelling. Some parents even wrote special letters and stories just for their kids, historical proof that not every parent turned out to be a monster with their children. Maybe these stories were often meant to teach lessons like the Book of the Knight of the Tower, written by a Frenchman named Geoffrey IV in 1371 for his daughters. It taught them how to behave in royal courts and warned them about people who might try to dishonour them. Geoffrey was worried about his daughters' well-being because he'd been through a lot during the 100 Years' War. What fun parents they were. No wonder they were called bedtime stories. The Book of the Knight of the Tower was translated into English in 1483 and became really popular. It was even translated into German and Dutch, with a German version made especially for the daughters of a renowned humanist and scholar who lived during the Renaissance period, Marquard von Stein. That being said, you won't be surprised that in the Middle Ages, young people didn't have the same youth culture we do now. Adolescence wasn't clearly recognised, and boys and girls hung out together based more on social status than gender. Childhood was seen as innocent, but puberty was when things got serious. Suddenly sin and temptation were on the table. As boys and girls grew up, their lives took different paths. Girls had to be careful and often ended up in domestic roles like servants or wives. Boys had more freedom but relied on their masters for everything, including money. Financial independence seemed like a far-off dream until they turned 21. One popular route for poorer young people was apprenticeship. Guilds helped regulate different trades, providing training and support. Apprentices lived with their masters and worked hard, but some weren't happy with the arrangement and ran away. Apprenticeships could last for a few years or even a decade, depending on the job. Completing one meant showing off what you'd learned with a masterpiece. If apprentices couldn't set up their own business, they might travel around looking for work as journeymen. Overall, apprenticeships offered opportunities but also came with challenges, especially for those from poorer families. And you guys, how was your childhood? Let me know in the comment.